you doing here?
Sister Jide, what are you doing here too?
Pastor, what are you doing here? She shouted in shock, her voice shaking as her eyes locked onto the man respected most. Pastor Mike froze at the doorway, unable to breathe, unable to believe what he was seeing. Sister Jide, what are you doing here too? He replied, his face pale. The choir mistress looked down in shame. It's my secret job, she whispered, fighting back tears. Pastor Mike swallowed hard, his mask of holiness breaking in that single moment. He sighed deeply and muttered, "Body no be firewood." And what they did next would shock you. Stay with me till the end, because this story is full of betrayal, hidden sin, and a scandal that shook a whole church. Before we continue, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to the beginning of how this holy man and modest woman ended up in this dark place. Pastor Mike was the kind of preacher people feared and respected. His sermons were fire, his voice thundered from the pulpit, and his words cut straight into the hearts of his members. He always preached against sexual sins. "Flee fornication," he would shout. "Any brother or sister caught in immorality will face judgment." People clapped and shouted, "Amen." Parents in the church thanked God for such a strict man of God. They believed their children were safe under his ministry. Pastor Mike loved the praise, the respect, and the way people looked at him as if he was untouchable. But deep inside, he was fighting a secret hunger. Every time he condemned sin, he was also battling his own lust. The more he shouted against it, the more it grew inside him. Yet nobody knew. To the congregation, Pastor Mike was holy, powerful, and without blemish. In the choir stood Sister Jide, the choir mistress. To the church, she was the perfect example of modesty. She wore long gowns that covered her from neck to toe. Her head was always tied, no makeup, no jewelry, just pure simplicity. Mothers pointed her out as a role model. "My daughter, be like Sister Jide," they would say. She sang like an angel, lifting the congregation into deep worship. Her reputation was spotless, her respect unchallenged. Nobody suspected she had another life outside church. But poverty has a way of pushing people into dark corners. Unknown to anyone, Sister Jide had taken up secret work in a brothel to survive. She hated it, but hunger was louder than shame. Every time she stood to lead worship, her voice trembled not just from passion, but from guilt. She carried two identities, holy in church, broken in secret. Pastor Mike was not just a preacher, he was a ruler in his church. He created strict rules for young people. Dating was forbidden. If a brother wanted to marry a sister, it had to go through endless meetings, fasting, and counseling. He controlled everything: who sat where, who spoke, who prayed. If he caught any young person in a relationship, punishment was sure. He saw himself as the guardian of holiness. The youths feared him more than they feared God. In Pastor Mike's church, love was a crime, and purity was not a choice. It was a command backed with punishment. Parents admired his discipline. Elders praised his strictness. But behind closed doors, Pastor Mike's heart was far from the holiness he demanded. He loved power. He loved respect. But most of all, he loved the hidden pleasures he secretly ran to at night. One day, his double life almost got exposed when Brother Philip was caught with a girlfriend. It started as whispers. People saw them walking home together after choir rehearsal. Soon the news reached Pastor Mike. Furious, he called Philip out during Sunday service. "Stand before the church," he commanded. The boy stood, shaking, embarrassed as the whole congregation stared. "Do you have a girlfriend?" Pastor Mike asked. Philip, voice trembling, admitted yes. The church gasped. Without warning, Pastor Mike stepped down from the pulpit, grabbed Philip by the collar, and slapped him hard across the face. The congregation froze in shock. "You demon of lust!" the pastor roared as he beat the young man in front of everyone. Mothers cried, youths trembled, and the whole church watched in fear. Pastor Mike declared, "No relationships here, only holiness will be allowed." That day, fear, not love, ruled the church. But that night, the same man who punished Philip for love sneaked into the red light district. He pulled a cap low over his face, parked his car in the shadows, and walked into a brothel. He told himself it was the last time. He told himself he needed it to release stress. But the truth was, he couldn't stop. Every visit made him hungrier. Each time he left, guilt covered him. But by the next week, he was back again. Pastor Mike lived in two worlds, the holy preacher by day, the secret sinner by night. He convinced himself that no one would ever know. He believed his secret was safe, but fate had been waiting for him, and on one night everything crashed down. Because on that night, when he opened the door to his usual room, he found not just any woman, but someone he never expected. The dimly lit room smelled of cheap perfume and smoke. Pastor Mike stepped in, pulling off his jacket. He turned, ready to greet the woman he had paid for, but his smile froze, his eyes widened. "Sister Jeed?" he whispered in shock. The choir mistress stood before him, equally stunned. Her hands shook as she pulled the scarf tighter around her head, her eyes filled with horror. "Pastor, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice weak. The air was heavy, the world silent. Pastor Mike stammered, I should ask you the same. What are you doing here?" Tears filled her eyes. "It's my secret job," she said, her voice breaking. He took a deep breath, shaking his head. The silence burned between them. Then, almost whispering, he muttered the words that would change both their lives. "Body, no be firewood." And that night, the line they swore never to cross was broken. They told themselves it would only be once, a mistake, nothing more. They promised it would never happen again. They cried, they prayed, they swore to God they would stay holy after that night. But once a fire starts, it does not stop. Pastor Mike became addicted. Sister Jeed, torn between survival and shame, allowed herself to keep falling. They met again and again and again. Each time they promised it would be the last. Each time they failed. On Sundays, he stood in the pulpit shouting against sin. On Sundays, she sang in the choir with tears in her eyes. The congregation saw holiness, but in truth the pastor and choir mistress were drowning in a forbidden affair, and unknown to them both, their secret was about to produce something that would shake the whole church to its foundation. After that night in the secret room, Pastor Mike and Sister Jeed thought they would bury the memory forever. They promised each other it was just a mistake, something to be erased by prayer and fasting. But instead of erasing it, the memory pulled them back together like a magnet they could not resist. Every week, Pastor Mike found a reason to call Sister Jeed to his office. At first, it was to discuss choir songs or pray together for the church. But soon, everyone noticed how the meetings always ended late at night, and Sister Jeed left the office looking shaken, as if she was fighting with her conscience. The pastor who once thundered against sin was now quietly drowning in it. Yet no one in church could imagine what was happening behind the closed doors. The pastor's appetite grew worse. It wasn't once, it wasn't twice. Soon, the man who once condemned others was living a double life. On Sundays, he preached holiness with fire, shouting that young people should flee fornication. But during the week, he was with Sister Jeed, doing the same thing he condemned. She was torn between shame and fear, but each time she wanted to quit, Pastor Mike would remind her how body no be firewood, and how she was helping the man of God relieve temptation. At first, she thought it was love, then she realized it was slavery. Pastor Mike controlled her, threatened her, and reminded her she would destroy the church if she ever spoke out. The modest choir mistress was now a prisoner of her own silence. But secrets are like smoke, they always find a way out. The first person who began to suspect was Brother Philip, the same brother Pastor Mike had humiliated in church for having a girlfriend. He noticed Sister Jeed's strange behavior. She stopped laughing freely. She was always absent-minded during choir rehearsals. Sometimes she avoided him completely. One day after service, Brother Philip stayed back and saw Pastor Mike's car parked near the same guest house that was known for prostitution. He shook his head, telling himself maybe it was just coincidence. But when he saw the same thing the following week, and then saw Sister Jeed sneaking out of the same guest house, his heart sank. He realized the holiest man in church and the most modest girl were hiding the darkest sin. The burden became too heavy for Brother Philip to carry alone. He told one of his close friends in church, and the gossip began to spread in whispers. At first, people dismissed it. How could Pastor Mike, a man who healed the sick and cast out demons, be involved with Sister Jeed? Impossible, but the whispers refused to die. Sister Jeed noticed the suspicious glances. She felt her chest tighten every time she stood before the church to lead praise and worship. One Sunday, as she lifted her hands to sing, she noticed even the elders staring at her strangely. She began to tremble inside. The secret was too heavy, and soon it was about to explode in the most shocking way. One afternoon, Sister Jeed missed choir rehearsal. People thought she was sick, but the truth was more dangerous. She had discovered she was pregnant. Her hands shook as she held the test result. How could she tell Pastor Mike? How could she face the church? She kept the secret for 2 weeks until the pregnancy symptoms grew worse. Finally, she told Pastor Mike. The pastor froze. His first words were not of comfort, not of responsibility, but of fear. He begged her to abort it. He told her it would ruin everything, his ministry, his marriage, the church. He promised to give her money, to take care of her, as long as she kept it quiet. But Sister Jeed shook her head. She said she could not kill her child. For the first time, she saw the fear in Pastor Mike's eyes, the fear of a man who knew the end was coming. From that day, the relationship between them turned into war.
I can't believe this is happening.
I'm so sorry.
I can't believe this is happening.
Pastor Mike stopped being gentle. He became angry, threatening, desperate. He told her if she exposed him, she would go down with him. But Sister Jeed was tired of living in chains. Each time she saw him climb the pulpit shouting about holiness, she felt sick. Her conscience burned hotter than fire. She was carrying his child while he stood before the world pretending to be holy. Her nights became restless. She cried alone, thinking of the shame her family would face, but she also thought of the truth that had to come out. She told herself if Pastor Mike would not confess, she would do it herself. The day of confession came like a storm. The church was packed. Pastor Mike was preaching with his usual fire, warning young people to stay away from sin. Suddenly, Sister Jeed walked to the altar, tears streaming down her face. People thought she was coming to give testimony. Instead, she grabbed the microphone from the pastor. The whole church froze. She said, "Church, I'm sorry, I have sinned, I'm pregnant." The crowd gasped. Then she turned, pointing at Pastor Mike, her voice trembling but strong. "And it is Pastor Mike that is responsible." The silence that followed was heavy, like the roof would fall. All eyes turned to the pastor. Some mouths hung open. Some people screamed. Pastor Mike's face turned pale. He shook his head violently and shouted, "It is a lie." But Sister Jeed refused to back down. She said, "Pastor, don't lie here in the presence of God. You know the truth." He kept shouting, "It is not true. This girl wants to destroy the church." The elders tried to hold Sister Jeed to stop her, but she pushed them off. Her next words were like thunder. "Pastor, if you think I'm lying, go and test for HIV. I gave it to you." The whole church erupted in screams. Some people fainted on the spot. Others shouted blood of Jesus. Pastor Mike's knees buckled. He staggered backward, his Bible falling to the ground. Then, before anyone could reach him, he collapsed right there on the altar. The man who once beat Brother Philip for having a girlfriend, the man who said holiness was the only way, had fallen under the weight of his secret. The church was never the same again.